good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. Welcome to session 2 of our 3-part micro-webinar series on creating addicting webinars. If you didn't attend session 1, don't worry. We're going to incorporate a lot of what we discussed into this session and build off of it, so you'll be able to catch up pretty quickly. Session 1 was all about planning your webinar style around a strategy to maximize influence on your audience. For example, if your strategy is to build loyalty and establish credibility with your customers, you might want to use a live chat Q&A session with product managers over a more traditional webinar format. So today what we're going to do is, building off of that, give you ideas for how to cater the event experience to get your audience more engaged. So let's get started. So I'd just like to begin by introducing our host today. My name is Deneen. I'm the Marketing Manager for Technology Advisors, Inc. We are a software consulting firm that helps companies select and implement CRM, and we also do data migration and integration. With us here, we have our experts from On24, Olivia and Morgan. They are great at understanding how to create interactive and engaging webinars for businesses that want to take their webinar strategy to that elite level. So we're really happy to have them with us today. Quick couple of housekeeping items. So you might notice that the console that you're on right now looks a little bit different from the typical webinar console that you might encounter. If you look at the bottom of that screen, you'll see there's some widgets. Feel free to just click around on those. There's a link to register for our next upcoming webinar. There's some information, bios about Morgan and Olivia and myself. There's some documentation you can download that's for you to keep about webinar strategy. You've got access to ask us any questions at any time throughout this presentation as well. And so we hope that you will take advantage of that and that you will enjoy our presentation today. So let's just start with a quick recap of session 1. The basic strategy that we wanted to hit on was that you want to build webinars for every stage of the buying cycle. Don't feel stuck in one aspect of the buyer's journey. There's so many things that you could focus on. Broaden that focus. And once you've established that strategy for one specific targeted audience, build out from there. So, for example, using webinars to increase customer loyalty, as I mentioned in a previous slide, something that you might do for that is a monthly update webinar, and those could be very short, 20 minutes or less, where you're just keeping connected to your customers, showing them the value of your brand, that you're bringing them the news about their industry. You might want to use webinars to drive your ABM strategy. There may be webinars you want to use for prospective buyers, such as a Deminar, which is a demo webinar, and that would be utilizing live video, more hands-on, more visual. Case study webinar, where you would have a client or somebody who's had a successful interaction with you come in and talk about their experience. That could be very powerful. And then also that Q&A session that I mentioned previously as well is another example of that. So you want to be strategic about why you're doing the webinar and make sure that you can repurpose those to create new content that you can utilize elsewhere. For example, plugging in some clips from your webinars into a nurture campaign, mixing it up a little bit by having that in there. So let's get into our session 2 content. Why do webinars get boring? Well, there's not really a lot of audience interaction. A lot of times there's nothing for the audience to do except simply sit there and listen. The webinar console itself might not be very engaging, kind of bland, not a lot going on. And sometimes as well, you have so much content that you want to share with your audience, and that's such a great thing. But if you make your slides too busy or too text heavy, you make it difficult for your audience to stay focused. And then if you try to replace that with images, that's great, but you have to make sure they're engaging images. So we're going to get into that a little bit more as we go forward here. And the first thing that we're going to talk about, I'm going to pass that off to one of these lovely ladies here. And I believe, Olivia, you're going to talk about what one of the strategies that we recommend is.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Deneen. So good morning and good afternoon. This is Olivia talking from On24. The section that I'm going to cover today is really about the transition from the idea of a sort of a flat PowerPoint presentation with, just really your PowerPoint joined with some images, perhaps, and words, right, to really creating a complete experience for your audience, to really be able to create that human interaction. So I really want to focus on why first impressions really do count. And I'm sure that your audience is probably familiar with something that might look similar to this, right? It's pretty static, and the idea is that we want to move away from the static, flat, uninteresting user face into something that can really deliver a brand experience. I like to think of it that you put so much time and effort and money into your branding efforts, so why wouldn't you really maximize your efforts in this investment, right? So the idea is, what if you were really able to get a platform that can sort of be an extension of your brand? And I want to really emphasize that this is an opportunity for your company to get really creative in those interactions. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is how to have your console sort of tell a story, right? And the idea is that we want these images to be conveyed to your audience in a sequential way. You want this to be, an exciting, eye-catching experience for your audience. And the reason for that is to keep them interested and keep them involved. The content of your presentation really only plays a part in the experience. For instance, only 28% of people read what's on the slide. So in that case, if you can only get 28% of their excitement, of their involvement, what else can we do to enhance the experience? So you don't necessarily want to overwhelm them with information. And because of that, there's different ways within the On24 platform that you can actually utilize, the resource section to have takeaways and other type of involvement so that it's continuously interactive and it's not overwhelming for them. I think that that's something that we always have to keep in mind is creating an easy experience for them. So another thing that I want to talk about is, don't tell it, but be able to show it. And being able to be in person with a prospect or client is really ideal, right? But it's not scalable. It's not realistic. So how can we create an interaction that isn't flat and cold? So I think the question is, what if you could present, one-to-many in a way that is cost-effective and scalable? So this is what I want to talk about. Don't be afraid of utilizing video, right? Don't be afraid of integrating video clips, which I'm going to do in a few moments here. You could integrate YouTube clips, promotional clips, and just sort of break up the presentation. I would also definitely encourage you to get creative and maybe conduct product demonstrations, have different interviews, or even case studies of loyal customers. And you can see an example on the screen of a couple of different types of video presentations that I listed. And something that I want to make note of, just in general, is that you can see that the background within all of these presentations is fairly clean. And that's because you're focusing on the video, right? You're focusing on this interaction with them. You want to be able to show your face. And because of this, webinars are a great way to engage and scale and have this interaction in real human ways. So one of the last things that I want to talk about is how important first impressions are and how they sort of come into stages. So, for example, being in an audience seat, the first thing is your visual, right? So it's the entire experience of your console. Now, if I'm just looking at something that's flat, I don't really have anything else to do during the initial first steps of the presentation. The key is to keep me interested initially. Give me things to do. Because, let's be realistic, right? You open a presentation, there are a lot of things that will happen. Perhaps you'll open your phone, you'll go to a new browser, and statistically, they'll come back to your presentation within 7 to 10 minutes. But think about all of that content that's being wasted in those 7 to 10 minutes that they're not paying attention. What can you do to keep their attention? And the key to creating a really effective console is keeping it simple and interactive. Essentially, use your console as an extension of your brand. Take advantage of implementing video. It's a very easy way to grab your audience's attention and break up the presentation like I mentioned. And essentially the console is your canvas to paint on. So get creative, be inspired, and push the boundaries. So I just want to show you an example from our friends at Match.com as to how they utilize and implement video and these interactions to have that connection with their audience. So go ahead and take
a really successful webinar features a catchy title, a topic that people want to hear about, and a presenter who really knows their stuff. Nobody knows this better than our friends over at Match.com. Match.com has created a really engaging webinar series for their customers. A webinar series that's going to teach people how to use their dating platform more effectively to find true love. But where Match really knocks it out of the park is with all the personal touches they include in each webinar that make the experience super fun and interactive for their viewers. They cover all sorts of dating-related topics that have catchy titles too, like 3H's Guide to Fling or the Real Thing, How to Attract a High-Quality Match Now, and 5 profile photos you need now. Also, each webinar is given by a life coach or dating expert, and Match uses the On24 platform to customize the webinar console to make it feel like viewers are actually having a conversation with the expert. They can see the presenter in their home or office. They get to ask questions to the expert during the presentation, and they can access all kinds of additional resources about the presenter. Match even went as far as customizing the menu
and I love that story of Match.com and how they keep engagement and attention, and they really pulled together all the themes that we're talking about in this presentation. So, when we talked about in part 1 of our series about the value of webinars, and the real value of webinars is that it takes a while to be able to really properly communicate a message, and you don't get a lot of time through most of the marketing campaigns that marketers typically rely on. We talked about the stat that with email, most people are going to click off of an email with maximum 8 seconds. But with a webinar, you have the ability to capture someone's attention for anywhere from 20 minutes to over an hour and a half. On24's average is about 55 minutes. So once you've got them on the webinar, you now have an ability to communicate a message and really have your audience leave with a lesson or a learning that you're trying to impart with them. So once you've got them on the webinar, they've registered, they're attended, how do you actually keep their attention for that full, to be able to get that full message? So Olivia talked about the importance of branding and visuals, because nothing gets someone clicking around on their laptop or checking ESPN more than a boring looking screen. But I'm going to dive into some other ways that you can boost your audience engagement and make your webinar more exciting for your audience. So the trick behind On24's really engagement-driven webinars, the reason why our stat is around 55 minutes, is that we build right into the platform a bunch of the different requirements to really engage your audience. And the first one is really around audience interactivity, giving your audience things to do while they're consuming your message, and making resources available so that they can engage with your message on their own terms. And so that's everything from the resource library, from including different URLs. And I'm going to go into this a little bit deeper as well. Another way that we do this is around multimedia content, the ability to be able to show video right within your platform, or have all this branding and customization within there as well. And the third is around fully customizable branding, so being able to create your console to be an extension of your brand, like Olivia talked about, so that when people are watching your webinar, they're really associating that message with your product, with your brand, and you can create a brand around your webinars in and of themselves. They can become their own product, their own value that you're offering to your customers. Another one is around one-click accessibility. So with both accessibility and for reliability, nothing makes it harder to keep someone's attention if they can't actually get into your webinar, which is why On24 is designed for 0 downloads, 0 plugins or permission requirements, and it's why we have the largest webinar infrastructure set up on the market. Because companies like Fidelity and Microsoft need to rely on On24 to host several thousand webinar attendees at a time. So that's a really important aspect of making sure that people can actually get in and consume your webinar and making sure that they actually hear your message. So let's dive into these first two around audience interactivity and multimedia content a little bit deeper. So the first way that you can really engage your audience is around making your webinar interactive. And we have a lot of different tools that you can use for engagement, including Q&A, polling, chat boxes, and social. And the real purpose of interactivity, the reason why interactivity helps so much is that it keeps people in your webinar console and it keeps them engaging with your message. It also increases content retention as well. So if you're talking about something and people are clicking away because there's not enough for them to do within the console, you're now vying for their attention and you're asking them to multitask. So making sure that they actually stay and engage with what you're talking about is a great way to make sure that they're retaining all of the great message and content that you're sharing with them. It also makes it more fun. It's more interesting to be able to click around and do stuff within a webinar. And the more fun it is, the more people are likely to come back. And then finally, as a marketer, it really helps provide insightful data on your viewers. So depending on how people are engaging, what types of questions they're asking, the types of answers they're giving you for polls, if they're interested in networking with other people who are on the webinar, all of that is really insightful data on your viewers that you can use in your follow-up strategy. You can use it to tailor how you run your webinars in the future. You may even come up with topics for future educational aspects or for other campaigns. So all of that really helps as well. And finally, it can help extend your reach. So if you're asking people to maybe send the recording around or to share key messages from your presentation on social, now you're hitting new audiences that you weren't going to reach before. So how can you do this? The best way to do this is to make the interactivity available through a bunch of different features and functions, and different people are going to choose to engage in different ways. For some people, they're going to want to read about related content on your topic and really dive deep into the meat of an idea. For others, they may be more interested in the networking or in the social aspect. So making sure that you have a breadth of opportunities for people to engage in different ways is a great way to appeal to your varied audience. And also highlight the interactivity during the webinar. So, you know, for us, we highlight when we're going to show a video, and we have some polling that's going to be coming up as well. And so letting your audience know that those types of things are available, like Deneen walking you through some of the widgets at the very beginning of the webinar, that's a great way to draw attention to those special features that people may not be expecting because they're not available on all platforms. And so finally, for unparalleled audience engagement, we have over 30 different types of ways that you can engage with people on the platform, and it really depends on what your message is and what your webinar is all about. But in addition to the ones I just talked about around like Q&A and polling, a few others that are great for boosting engagement and interactivity are directing the audience to a related link. So maybe you're talking about the value of webinars, but you have an ROI calculator or an assessment tool on your website that you can point people towards. Maybe it's the resource list where people can go and read case studies about how other people have engaged with your topic. Maybe it's something like referring a colleague to the next edition of your webinar if it's something that appeals to their portfolio or work experience. Or it could be something like sharing additional content with their team so that their team can engage with your brand on, you know, as an account as opposed to just as an individual. And finally, unique multimedia engagement. So it's always nice when you can break up a presentation and show a video clip or something more engaging and fun. And that, as a result, On24 allows you to host all different types of multimedia. So everything from video clips, which we showed you today, but you can also integrate your webcams or Skype, a video conferencing unit as well, broadcast studio video if you're putting on a really polished interview, for instance. We have some customers who bring on 4 or 5 panelists at a time who will do a roundtable discussion on something that's happening in the market or potentially a group customer case study. And that's a great way to bring people into the studio and really elevate the professionalism of your presentation. And live event webcasts are a great way for this too, right? So a lot of companies are spending $500,000 to $1 million on a large live event, and capacity might be 1,000 to 2,000 people. How do you extend the investment that you've made in this live event? A great way to do that is to make that available as either a live event broadcast or as an on-demand event a few months later. For instance, On24 recently had our big event, Webinar World, in March, and so we recorded every session and we turned it into an on-demand virtual event that aired for the first time just on Tuesday. And Demandbase, for instance, is another customer that does this. They had their Marketing Innovation Summit back in April, and they also just launched an on-demand version of their event. So this is a great way to extend the reach of your event. You can get 3, 4x type of viewers, and it's no additional cost to you because it's hosted and aired on the web in the cloud. And finally, we have a dynamic multi-presenter experience as well. So you can have multiple presenters speaking to the same topic, and they're advancing the slides together, and they can be showing different clips, and they can be presenting from all around the world, which is a really awesome experience if you're looking to, to make your presentation more interesting and bring in different perspectives on your topic. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Deneen to talk about how you find someone who's an amazing presenter to present your message.
Thanks, Morgan. So the last topic we're going to touch on today is finding your star. And I am going to actually ask you to let me know, how do you typically find a speaker for your webinar? Is it whoever is available in your company at the time, somebody who's a higher up in the company? Depending on your industry, you might need somebody who's like a subject matter expert. So you would probably typically go to that person. Or do you just kind of look for somebody who is very charismatic, has a lot of energy, and you just know that they'll be able to really capture attention? So let me give you just a minute to answer that. And I don't want to take too much time waiting because I know we've got 8 minutes left, and I promised you this would be 30 minutes or less. So let's see. Okay, so it looks like most people either go by whoever has the best title or whoever is the subject matter expert. Both of those are great starting points. Obviously, you could always utilize a subject matter expert. That's a person who would be able to speak to very well to whatever you are trying to convey. So that makes a lot of sense. Understandable as to why most people would do that. Best title, of course, that conveys like a little bit of power and authority. If you have your CEO on a webinar, maybe somebody is more likely to want to hear from that individual than they would, from an intern, let's say. So also understandable approach. So in general, though, one of the best practices we want to talk about today is the great speaker in your webinar is what makes the difference between that really successful and engaging experience and a snooze fest. So, what are some things that you want to think about? What are some things you want to look for in regards to that? There's we say this in a loving way, a big mouth in every company, if you will. Think about the people in your company who you may not normally have as voices on your webinars. There's probably a few individuals that have a really big personality, and they have the knowledge, which is going back to that expert status, to pull off that webinar and make it sound really great. Why not utilize those individuals? Look within your company to find those fresh webinar stars to contribute to the media presentations. And don't feel like you have to stick to one person talking. I think traditionally webinars tended to be more one person talking for an extended period of time, but that is also part of what could create that snooze fest that I was mentioning earlier, is that you get used to hearing that one monotone voice and you tune out. So, think about how intermingling speakers can make it more exciting and make things more engaging. If you feel you've exhausted your internal stars, start looking at your networks. it's likely you know at least one industry expert, or you have a business partner who is very charismatic, an associate, etc., somebody who has the pizzazz to really rock your webinar, and ask them if they would share their expertise as a guest speaker. Big mouths, as we call them, they can be especially great if you're doing a Q&A type of webinar, or you're doing a serialized webinar program. And these are things, again, that we addressed in our first webinar in this series, case study webinars where you have a panel of people. That's especially interesting because you might have a panel of experts on your case study webinar, but maybe they're not all, this pizzazz, exciting, sparkly type of person that you really would like as your star of the webinar. If you bring in that big mouth pizzazz person, they can actually help guide the thought leaders and make things more interesting. So you're creating a balance between the types of speakers that you're having in your webinar, and that's helping really bolster that engagement. So in summary, what do we want to do? We want to enhance audience participation and engagement. How do we do that? We increase audience interaction. That's polls, Q&A, embracing the power of videos, not being afraid to get those videos in there and to use clips and, really kind of step outside our comfort zone. Being visual, focusing more on the imagery and understanding that people do not always read, unfortunately, all of the things on your slide. So be minimalistic. And you can pass out handouts later and takeaways for them to have after the fact. And if they want to go into it in more detail at that point, they can do that. But to make the impact in the moment, you have to be visual, and you need a strong, impassioned speaker to sell your message. The overall theme then becomes more engagement. And from that engagement, you kind of get an added bonus, because when you can understand what people are interested in, okay, a lot of people, downloaded this asset that I had provided, the top 5 ways to make your webinar awesome. Okay, people like that infographic. That's something they're interested in. More people answered the poll questions. So poll questions are probably something that I need to start looking at incorporating more. So the more you do that, the more data you collect, and the more you understand about your audience. And when you can understand more about your audience, you can make a better webinar. You can build better strategies. And in the end, that will help you turn that into more revenue. So we're going to end. We've got about 3 minutes left. I feel good about that. I think that worked out well, where we will take some questions. So feel free to send your questions on over. I do see a couple here initially that we'll start off with. They're filtering in. So if there's any new ones that you think of that somebody else has not asked that you would like answered, of course, please let us know. The first question we have here, is there a best practice for where to insert poll questions? So for example, if I want to do a poll at the start of a webinar versus the middle or end, what have you seen success with?
I can go ahead and take that question. This is Morgan speaking from On24. I think it really depends on what type of engagement you're looking to drive. So for instance, Mark Bornstein from On24, he sometimes does polls at the very beginning of a webinar best practice series session, where he'll ask the audience a couple of questions about what they're looking to learn that day. And then he'll actually tailor the presentation and the way, like the type of content that he's sharing, based on what the audience says, because you never know who's going to show up and if they're coming from B2C or if they're coming from a specific vertical, or maybe they have a specific pain point in mind. So he'll often do one at the beginning, but then he'll do others that are specific to the content as he goes through. So that could be an interesting way of doing it at the very beginning. Another option could be if you're looking to get feedback on how your presentation went. Maybe you're trying out a new format, or you're trying out a new syndicated series. A poll question at the end can be a great way to get feedback on how your presentation went and what the audience thought. and what they'd like to learn for next time. So depending on where you're putting them in, you could be asking different types of questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Morgan. If I could follow up on that to you about, depending on what you're trying to do, somebody was asking, is it always bad to just have words on a slide?
I mean, I don't think so. I think in general, I think you typically want your slides to be more visual and more colorful. They really pop off the page better that way, and I think that's a better way to engage someone visually and keep them interested. But perhaps you're doing a training session, for instance, where there's a lot of technical statistics or there's a lot of language that needs to be read so that the audience can really consume it. I think about this a lot when I think about like accreditation groups or financial services who are maybe giving information about the markets. For that, your slides are going to be pretty text heavy most likely because you want people to both hear and see your content so that they can really consume it in the best way. Another possibility could even be if you want to make a big statement by having one word on a slide, or maybe your slide is very just black and white, or you're posing a question like, what is the purpose of life? And like that is just the thing on the slide, and that's making a big impact in the fact that it's not so visual and that it is very powerful in that way as well, almost minimalistic.
Yes, I think that speaks to, wanting the interface to be as clean as possible. Obviously, sometimes you have to have words on the slide and there are things that are important to mention. And so, you want to get that in front of them, but it's just, wrestling with what is really absolutely key to have here and what can I just speak to and send them additional information on later. And then it looks like we have at least one more question here. Do you have any best practices for which days are best days to have webinars? And I can take that one. I have done some research on this myself, and I also, from experience, trial and error, and my own data, found that it seems that Wednesdays or Thursdays tend to be better days, statistically speaking. And I think, originally I had just chosen Wednesdays and Thursdays because those days were good for me, and then I started doing the research on it and put the pieces together, and basically there's a reason for that because Mondays and Fridays are usually our either catch up or scramble to get everything done days during the week, and sometimes all that work from Monday can kind of seep into Tuesday and take over your Tuesday too. So usually by Wednesday or Thursday, people are they're more on track with their to-do lists and their schedules, and everything is kind of flowing along nicely as the week goes. So typically Wednesdays and Thursdays, I don't want to say absolutely those are the only 2 days that you can do. If you know your audience and there's a particular reason that you feel that they would be more engaged on a different day, just try it out. Try it out, see how it works. And if that works better for them, then do what works for your audience. Just from what I've learned and from what I've read and my own experience, Wednesdays and Thursdays work best for our audiences. So it's all about what works best for who you're trying to target. Okay, so I believe that's all the questions. I hope that we answered those to everyone's satisfaction. And of course, if you think of anything else that you would like clarification on, I hope you can reach out to us. Again, on the widgets on the bottom, our contact information is there, our LinkedIn, our bios. There's also the link for registering for our third session. We will send up a follow-up email in the next few days to recap the important points of this presentation, and that will also include our contact information. There's also, if you are interested in trying On24 as trying to utilize some of these things that we talked about today, you can see that free trial button on your console. Feel free to click that as well. I just want to say thank you to our lovely presenters. And in session 3, we're going to show you how to increase the longevity of your webinars and repurpose that content and then use that for other things. Because you put so much effort into them, you want to get the most out of it. So that's what we're going to address in session 3. That'll be at the end of the month, and I hope we'll see you all there. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.